Hello everyone, today is a video I'm very excited for as we are turning this Halloween doll into a Sora's Crew or Sora's Heart Hotel doll. And we're starting by removing all of the hair and her ponytails, just making sure every bit of hair is gone. We popped her head off with some hot water, and this would be easier if we had some small needle nose pliers, but we didn't. So we're using tweezers and a flathead screwdriver to remove all of the hair plugs. And we're using a box cutter to cut off Howleen's werewolf ears, which actually presented us with a new problem because now the doll didn't have any ears. So I used hot glue to make a mold of another doll's ear. I believe it is a Supergirl doll. And then when that hot glue dries, it just pops off and it makes most of the details from the ear, but you kind of have to just use it as a basic mold and add the details from there. So I used some Sculpey clay to shape the ears. I tried air dry and it didn't really work. So the trick to this was to just very carefully fold up the sides and pull the whole piece out. And then I was able to trim off the extra that it left. Now we're going to make the wig cap. So Emmy helped with that by laying a piece of tulle down and then a little thin piece of elastic and sewing it on like the band of the wig cap. You'll see in these shots the doll did not have ears yet, and that is because we had not figured out yet how to make the ears. And it turned out that they needed to be super glued on before doing the face. Otherwise, they would kind of just peel off and fall off. So I had to kind of coat them in super glue. And you'll see we've got 4 wig caps here because this doll is able to be Shion, Roxas or Ventus, Vanitas, or Sora, which is why this project is so ambitious. So we're removing the face with acetone, and it'll be one doll with one face, which unfortunately leaves us without the option to do Vanitas' yellow eyes, but that could always be another doll. So we're using acetone to remove all of the face, and then I'm using my Glam Light pizza palette to blush the face. I know some people don't love to use makeup on dolls, but it really works better for me than the pastels that you can see I even tried on the right there. It just was so much more pigmented and just generally better. And although this video is not sponsored by Glam Light in any way, I do want to say I have a code for this makeup palette and any palette on their site. As you saw in my pizza video, you can use code FORESTEMO, all one word, to get 15% off anything on the website. I don't get to use this code very much, so I gotta bring it up if I'm using this palette here. And hopefully some of you guys will find it helpful for dolls or your own face. But that is what I'm using. You'll notice that I have also put some hot glue in the holes on the head of the doll. And that will not be permanent. I just did that since it had those gaps in the face. It kept bending and distorting or contorting the face. So putting that hot glue there keeps the face from bending and warping and cracking the layers as I'm doing them. But I took them out after, and once everything was sealed in with Mr. Super Clear, nothing would crack or flake or anything. But just to be safe, I put them there. I don't show the product on camera, but I am using the UV Cut Mr. Super Clear spray sealant. And I'm just doing a coat of sealant and then a coat of blushing, a coat of sealant, a coat of blushing. And you can't really tell from the video, but I did many, many layers of this. And it really takes a lot to build it up, even with these being so pigmented. I had a lot where I was going back and trying to undo some of the pigment and just make it really even and blend it out. So you can see there, this is almost the final layer. And then I went in with Royal watercolor pencils, and I used black, brown, white, light blue, and dark blue, and occasionally a pink or an orange for the lips or eye crease details. But it's really a matter of building up the color still with these. So you'll see I go in and the lines are really light, and then eventually the lines are darker and darker. That's because I'm spraying it and then coming back and doing another coat over it of the pencils. And if I really wanted the color to build up more, I actually wet the end of the pencil and drew on the face with that. But you have to be really careful not to wet two colors next to each other if you're doing that, or else it will kind of rub together and be a mess. Whenever I really wanted the pigment to be lighter, I actually just took a dry Q-tip and rubbed off some of the extra. Or if I made a mistake, I used a tiny eraser, much like the ones on the top of mechanical pencils, and got in there and just erased it. Some people prefer to use a kneaded eraser, but because I was getting in the eye crease and doing these certain angles, and some of it was a little heavy-handed. I'm kind of heavy-handed with this stuff. So I really needed a stronger eraser that wouldn't be kneadable and bend when I was trying to erase. So that's why I'm using a little hard eraser instead of the kneadable. I also want to mention really quick that the silicone mat is just a baking mat, and it's really great because you can blend colors on top of it. The whites of the eyes were a bit of a challenge because I just didn't have a brush that was small enough. So I kind of had to go in and erase bits, which is not hard to do because it's acrylic paint, so you can kind of scrape it off after it dries. So I just used an eraser to pick up the extra bits and peel them off. And then I had to go back in with the pencils and build up the eye color again. Thankfully, it didn't come out too chunky looking. And it honestly looks like you can't tell which order I did the steps in. But I think on other dolls, I'll be doing the whites of the eyes before I fill in the iris. I also don't show this in the video, but you can see the eyes and lips are very shiny. And that's because I put the Sculpey air-dried glaze on top of them after in order to give them that wet look. The next very ambitious aspect of this whole project was the wigs. I made a different wig for Xion, Vanitas, Sora, and then Vanitas and Roxas are sharing a wig. So that was 4 wigs, but I'm only going to show you the process on Sora's because the yarn I used for the other characters was too dark or too light to show up well on camera. So that's why I'm just showing you Sora's. But it's the same process of tying the yarn and brushing it out. It's 100% acrylic yarn. I'm using the Karen yarn, and it actually is surprisingly soft. And this was just like cheap brown yarn that I got at the craft store. So once you brush it out and get all the fluff out, you'll see you've got a pile here. I've got a whole bag filled with all of the yarn just from this project. That's just fluff from this project. So then you want to spray it with either Garnier Fructis straightening mist or Whole Blends softening oil. I believe that's what it's called. And you really want to be light with it and make sure you rub it all in and get it really dispersed throughout the fibers so that the hair doesn't look oily, but it also protects it so that when you straighten it, it doesn't just cook it and look terrible. You can see when I straighten it, my hair straightener was as low as it would go, and it was still too hot. So it makes these little bumps on the hair, which you can kind of rub out, but it's just something you can avoid if you protect the hair and you have the temperature low enough. The silicone baking mat came in hand after I had cut all the pieces for the wefts because I was able to just put a layer of glue down and go across and place all the hair in a pile. And then it just becomes a matter of soaking the ends of the hair with glue. I'm using a sponge brush and I'm using tacky glue. Quick dry tacky glue works the best, I think. and it dries fairly clear, so I wouldn't really bother buying the clear one. But it was really helpful to have the quick dry because it would take forever. So once I had the wefts, I just trimmed some of that glue off the end. I want to leave the bare minimum amount of glue on the end of this, so it's just barely staying together. And when it came to putting the wig together, I honestly even cut some of the glue completely off of some of the pieces because it just made it look more natural than having clumps of hair. You can see Emmy is doing the glue layer on the wig cap. This will just make sure that all these wefts stay on the wig easier than they would if it was just being glued straight onto tulle. Adding all the wefts is an interesting process because it's difficult to know where you'll end up with gaps, but you want to try to not leave really any gaps, but work in a spiral up the top of the head until you get to the top, in which we really didn't know what to do. So you'll see we put a little ponytail on the top of it. This was not really the best way to do this, but we didn't know at the time. So for now, the Sora doll sort of looks like Ariana Grande, but we are going to cut off this ponytail and just kind of stack little clumps of hair on the top of the head until it's thinned out and looks sort of like a natural part. The next part is actually one of my favorite things about doing dolls, which is cutting the hair. So you can see I'm really chopping up the front first, and then it's going to be about spiking it up, which was honestly the hardest part about these dolls, was getting the spikes in their hair. So you'll see I do a lot of angled chopping, which kind of creates that triangular shape at the ends. And I cut off the length and saved the extra pieces so that I could go back and fill in gaps with them. And soon you'll see we are going to chop off this ponytail and it's gone. So now I'm just adding loose pieces, and this is another one of those repetitive processes where you're going to glue a little bit on there and then brush out the extra that didn't stick, and then you're going to glue a little bit on there and then brush out the extra that didn't stick, and over again. And then you're cutting layers into it all the way around and brushing it out and spiking it and cutting layers. But it was fun. I had a hard time figuring out what to do with the back, and it was difficult to tell just how tall to make the spikes because at some points they looked a little long and it looked a little goofy, so I had to trim it down quite a bit. But I think that it came out looking pretty all right. You'll see there's a couple ways you can still style this. So sometimes his spikes aren't always exactly the same as they were in the other frames or in a picture or something. But overall, it is completely stylable to that style with this cut, and you can just spike it up with your fingers, no gel, nothing like that. And here we have Shion, who has the flat bob. All of these wigs are made the same way, so you can see you can style them very different ways. So Shion has the smooth bits. Roxas or Vanitas is very spiky and honestly looks a little bit like Cloud. I use some very light yarn, but it also looks like the concept art, so I sort of like that color on it. And then here's our terrible boy, Vanitas. His spikes were the most difficult because they're so much bigger than Sora's, so that's his look. So if you liked this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more crafty stuff and to see the clothes and completed doll next week, which I'm very excited for. So I will see you then. Bye.